Saudi Arabia, a country known for its rich history, culture, and oil reserves, and as the birthplace of Islam and home to the two holiest cities in Islam, Mecca and Medina, has been an object of speculation lately. A discovery made in the region has brought anxiety and fear to all that have heard of it. What is this discovery? Why is it such a cause of fear? Continue watching this video to find out. Saudi Arabia has a strong religious history, especially among Muslims. Thinking of Saudi Arabia takes your mind to Mecca and Medina, the holy cities of Islam, and you would rarely associate it with Christianity. Well, that is until recently. Some suggest that Mount Sinai is in Saudi Arabia, stating biblical references and giving reasons for their claims. In Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, this mountain holds great significance. It is considered a sacred site and attracts visitors from around the world who seek a spiritual connection or wish to retrace the steps of Moses. According to biblical accounts, the mountain is believed to be where Moses and the Israelites received the 10 Commandments from God, which became the core of the moral and religious teachings of Judaism and Christianity. As written in the book of Exodus, God instructed Moses to come to the top of the mountain and gave him the 10 Commandments, which he put down on a stone tablet. This made the mountain called Jebel Musa, Arabic for the Mountain of Moses. Christians view Mount Sinai as a foreshadowing of the heavenly Mount Zion, where God dwells with his people in glory. Jesus' Sermon on the Mount corroborates his teaching to his followers, Christians, to live according to the spirit of the law and not just the letter, as though they have touched divinity and God lives among them. Bible accounts also associate Mount Sinai with the transfiguration of Jesus, where he transformed in the presence of Moses and Elijah. Jews consider the mount the most sacred place on earth, where they uniquely encountered God and where humanity interacted with God, representing a spiritual and physical connection which agrees with the very core of Judaism, that the religion connects the divine with earthly existence, making the teachings received at Mount Sinai directly relevant to the everyday lives of Jews. According to Jewish tradition, it is also a place where Abraham went to sacrifice his son, Isaac. The Jews are believed to be God's people, and this is one of their proofs, as they believe that God chose them as his special people and gave them the Torah as a gift and responsibility, solidifying their role as God's chosen people. They also believe that the encounter was God's covenant with them and emphasized their responsibility to uphold the commandments given to them. It is evident in the book of Deuteronomy, where Moses reminded the Israelites of the covenant of God and urged them to obey his commandments. Jews view Mount Sinai as a symbol of their identity and destiny as God's people. Also, in the Quran, God spoke to Moses on Mount Sinai and gave him the tablets of the Torah, which make up the holy scriptures of Islam. These rules and commandments serve as a code of conduct and reflect God's will for his people. Also, the mountain represents an encounter between humanity and divinity, showing the connection between God and his people and highlighting the theme of obedience and the importance of living according to his commands. In Islamic stories, God praised Moses for his patience and obedience and instructed him to deliver his message to the Pharaoh and his people. It also represents God's grace and mercy in that after Moses returned from speaking with God, the Israelites had turned to sin. Yet God showed mercy and called Moses back to give him another set of laws. Furthermore, Mount Sinai is often used in Christian teachings to represent the journey of faith, the pursuit of holiness, and the desire to draw closer to God. In each of the three religions, we can see the mountain holds great significance. Unfortunately, the exact location is still shrouded in mystery and has never been established. It has been said to be in Egypt, but recently, researchers claim to have found evidence that Mount Sinai is really in Saudi Arabia. Now that we see the significance of the mount to all three Abrahamic faiths, let's get down to settling its location. For a long time, Mount Sinai has been believed to be in Egypt, in the country's southwestern corner, near the border of Israel and the Sinai Peninsula. The mountain, considered the holiest site in Judaism, stands approximately 2,285 meters, 7,497 feet above sea level, and is home to many important religious sites, including the famous St. Catherine's Monastery and the Church of the Transfiguration. St. Catherine's Monastery is a Greek Orthodox monastery on the Sinai Peninsula in Egypt. It is one of the oldest monasteries in the world, having been built in 527 AD by Emperor Justinian I after he got robbery complaints from the hermit monks who frequented the place and had eventually settled there. Not only is the monastery famous for its age and long-standing history, but it is quite popular because it was home to the world's oldest continuously operating library, housing ancient manuscripts and books dating back to the 4th century. Its stunning Byzantine architecture and its breathtaking collection of icons add to its beauty, making it even more popular among pilgrims. The monastery also encloses the Chapel of the Burning Bush, which is said to be the site of the burning bush from which God spoke to Moses. St. Catherine's Monastery is an iconic and essential place of pilgrimage for Christians around the world. During the era of the Fatimid Caliphate, an existing chapel was converted into a mosque used by the Muslims regularly until the era of the Mamluk Sultanate in the 13th century, but is only in use now on special occasions. During the Sultan-led reign of the Ottoman Empire, the mosque was left in desolate condition until its restoration in the early 20th century. As stated earlier, the mountain's location is still under deliberation, and no one knows the exact place. Due to this, over time, numerous places in the Middle East region have been continuously proposed by scholars as the original site of Mount Sinai as they study the possible locations in the Bible and other historical books. Of all the proposed locations, one has stood out, generating a lot of controversy, and it all began when Charles T. Baker, a British traveler, explorer, and Bible scholar, proposed the idea in 1873. He proposed that Mount Sinai was a volcano and published a pamphlet titled Mount Sinai, a Volcano. In his short book, he argued that the Bible described the mountain as exuding smoke and fire despite the lack of ash. He also guessed the mountain would be along the route Moses took on his return to Egypt from Midian in northwest Arabia. Consequently, he set his sights on the mountains at the head of the Gulf of Aqaba, particularly Jabal an-Nur, or the Mountain of Light. When Baker finally visited his predicted location of Mount Sinai, he discovered it was not volcanic and was humble enough to withdraw his volcanic theory. However, he still stood by his assessment of the location, only accepting his wrong in claiming the mountain was a volcano, and instead stating that the biblical references might have been referring to the area during a storm. Although many other scholars disagree with Charles Baker, as they interpreted the Bible more metaphorically or symbolically, others chose to walk in the way of his claims. Other scholars have made their claims about the location of the mountain in places like Egypt, Jordan, or Israel. Unfortunately, Charles Baker died soon after visiting Jabal an-Nur, before he could explore the region more and possibly prove his theory. Alois Musil and H. Philby were two influential scholars who accepted the proposition of Charles Baker and agreed that Mount Sinai is in Saudi Arabia. Musil was an Austrian-Czech scholar who trained extensively throughout the region in the late 19th and 20th centuries. Philby was a British intelligence officer who worked extensively in the Middle East and North Africa during the 1920s and 1930s. He was actively involved in the creation of the Arab Legion and was a key figure in Britain's relationship with Saudi Arabia, documenting his journey and writing several books on his journeys and observations, including The Heart of Arabia and Arabian Highland. In their studies, they both indicated Jebel al-Manifa near Wadi al-Rab as the location of Mount Sinai. In his book Arabian Highland, Philby describes his visit to Jabal Anar in 1952 and confirmed the location as Mount Sinai, while noting that the mountain had a much revered mosque on its summit. In the book, he continued that in comparison to all of the proposed locations in Egypt and Jordan, Jabal al-Manfiyah fit the location the most. In 1971, a French scholar, Jean Koenig, proposed the volcanic peak of Halal Bedr as the likely location of Mount Sinai in Saudi Arabia. He even published an article titled Sinaitic Itineraries in Arabian, and he detailed his arguments about the accuracy of his interpretation of the description of the mountain's location. Although Jean Koenig built his work based on the progress his predecessors Charles Biquet, Alas Musil, and H. Philby have made in identifying with Saudi Arabia as the location of the mount, he was the first to provide as much proof, pieces of evidence, and detailed arguments. As much as his argument might seem convincing, the most controversial one is yet to come. If Jean Koenig, with all his pieces of evidence, isn't the most controversial, then which is? The most controversial and popular of all, the proposed hypothesis came from an American researcher, Ron Wyatt. The researcher also believed that the mountain was in Saudi Arabia. Still, he believed it was at a different location. Jabal en-Laz, the Mountain of Almonds, northwest of Saudi Arabia, near the Jordanian border, above the Gulf of Aqaba. After claiming to have discovered the locations of other historical sites like Noah's Ark, Sodom and Gomorrah, the Red Sea crossing, the Ark of the Covenant, and other biblical archaeological treasures, he also used some to support his claim on the mountain's location. Wyatt's whole assumption is based on his understanding of the text of Exodus 3:1. He assumed that because Moses kept Jethro's flocks and Jethro was a priest of Midian, that meant that the mountain of God that Moses came upon must also be in the land of Midian. After claiming in 1978 to have discovered the Red Sea crossing at Nuwaba in the Gulf of Aqaba, Wyatt concluded that the real Mount Sinai must be located east of the path of the miraculous Red Sea crossing, in a territory of western modern-day Saudi Arabia. The best possibility, Wyatt thought, was Jabal al-Laz, because it represented the highest peak in the entire western Saudi Arabian mountain range. He also claimed that he had found archaeological evidence of a large encampment near the mountain, which he believed to be the Israelites' encampment before their exodus. During his research, he also uncovered a large pile of granite rocks about a quarter of a mile from the mountain's base, with drawings of bulls, cows, and oxen. From it, Wyatt deduced that this place was the Great Altar of Israel at the foot of Mount Sinai in Saudi Arabia, and possibly the one mentioned in the Golden Calf story. He then went further, using his discovery of the Red Sea to point out what he believed were remnants of the Pharaoh's chariots found at the bottom of the Red Sea, facing Jabal al-Laz, a blackened mountaintop supposedly indicating the fire of God, a massive split rock with the appearance of a powerful water flow, 12 stone pillars located below the mountain, and other findings, all of which he believed were related to either the Israelites' time of living at the feet of the mount or their exit. However, many scholars have continued to argue against Wyatt's theory, stating various reasons for the controversy over his work regarding his methods and evidence. Firstly, Ron Wyatt was only an amateur archaeologist, had no formal archaeology training, and his methods were crude and unsystematic. He did not publish any peer-reviewed reports or papers on his findings. He only spread the word about them based solely on his opinions. Secondly, because of his unusual methods, secular and religious authorities have had problems with him. He has even been arrested and jailed by the Saudi Arabian government, tagging him as an Israeli spy for trespassing and smuggling artifacts. Additionally, some biblical scholars suggest that while Apostle Paul was teaching the Galatian Christians about God's covenants, as indicated in Galatians chapter 4 verse 25, he might have said that Mount Sinai was in Saudi Arabia, in Midian, which seems to support Wyatt's claims. This seems to be a misrepresentation, because in the actual text, Paul only says that Mount Sinai is in Arabia, not Saudi Arabia. Scholars have taken up the argument that the Galatians reference could be used to support the notion that Mount Sinai is in Saudi Arabia only if Apostle Paul was looking at a modern political map, which could not have been possible. So if he was looking at a first-century Roman map, the landmass of Arabia in Paul's time included the Arabian Peninsula, the Sinai Peninsula, and northern Egypt. The Arabian Peninsula, made up of Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, UAE, among other Asian countries, is a vast desert landmass. Still, you would be shocked to know that the desert we see now in Saudi Arabia was once covered with lush vegetation, and there is both scientific and historical evidence to back up the claim. In the Quran, the holy book of Islam revealed to the Prophet Muhammad in the 7th century CE, many verses describe the natural phenomena and the wonders of Allah's creation, such as the sun, moon, stars, mountains, seas, plants, animals, and humans. The Quran contains some of the historical events and places related to Arabia, and some of the oldest written sources that mention the geography and climate of Arabia. Ancient researchers, travelers, and geographers, such as Herodotus, Josephus, Eusebius, and others, also write about the vegetation and characteristics of Saudi Arabia. They describe the land as a land of mountains, valleys, rivers, forests, and spices. The land was so green and produced so much that they had plenty to export and established trade routes that connected the land to other regions. That is to speak of historical writings and facts. Scientifically, there are fossil records of the preserved remains or impressions of organisms, plants, and animals that once lived there. The fossils document the evolution and diversity of life on Earth and the environmental changes that occurred over time. The fossils found further support the claims of the large and diverse ecosystem. They are from elephants, hippos, and crocodiles. We can agree that these animals would not exist in a small ecosystem because they need abundant food and water. The fossils also indicate the existence of rivers and lakes that support diverse aquatic fauna and flora. Fossils dating back to 350,000 years ago or earlier across the Arabian Peninsula that were mapped using satellite imagery suggest that Saudi Arabia had a wetter and greener climate. Scientists have also found fossils of seahorses in the area. They were small fish that live in shallow coastal waters and feed on crustaceans and plankton. All of this history is to show us that Saudi Arabia had different types and phases of vegetation and animals in its history. Also present are the fossils of humans, the preserved bones or artifacts of humans and their ancestors that lived in the past, indicating the interaction and adaptations of humans with their environment. This is why the Green Saudi Arabia theory came into play. The initiative was launched by Saudi Arabia's Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman to improve the country's environmental performance, and since the geological records showed evidence that proves the presence of water bodies and landforms that require a wetter climate, the theory focuses on reducing the country's emissions, increasing renewable energy use, and developing a circular economy. Some of these records are portrayed in ancient river channels and lake basins. These are the traces of former watercourses and water bodies that carved and filled the land surface. They indicate the existence of rainfall that supported a hydrological cycle and a freshwater ecosystem. Scientists have also referenced the chemical composition and isotopic ratios of rocks and sediment. These are the characteristics of the minerals and elements that make up the solid materials of the Earth. They indicate the temperature, pressure, humidity, and salinity conditions that influenced their formation and alteration, suggesting that Saudi Arabia had different types and phases of climate in its history. Scientists have also discovered coral reefs and seagrass beds in Saudi Arabia. These structures depend on sunlight, indicating the presence of clear and warm seawater that provides nutrients for habitat for many marine organisms. Since many discoveries are dated back millions of years, you shouldn't be shocked to know that it applies to this too. Another shocking discovery in Saudi Arabia is the stone structures dubbed gates by archaeologists. These gates are rectangular platforms enclosed by low walls and connected by long walls that form a courtyard. They are found in the volcanic fields north of Medina and other parts of Saudi Arabia. The gates were first observed in person by a group of amateur archaeologists led by Dr. Abdullah Al-Said in 2004, before they revisited the area using Google Earth in 2008, and was stunned by the extent and variety of the structures. They sent their photos and coordinates to professional archaeologists such as Dr. David Kennedy, an archaeologist at the University of Western Australia, who studied the stone structures of Arabia for decades using aerial and satellite imagery, and published his findings in the Journal of Arabian Archaeology and Epigraphy. He also identified other types of stone structures that date back to different periods and serve different purposes. Dr. Kennedy suggests that they may have been built by nomadic tribes who moved across the landscape following the availability of water and pasture. He also suggests they may date back to at least 2,000 years ago, and maybe as far back as 9,000 years ago, making them older than Stonehenge or the Egyptian pyramids. The discovery of the gates is significant because it reveals a new aspect of the ancient history and culture of Saudi Arabia and its people, and also challenges the perception of Saudi Arabia as a desert devoid of human impact. To cap it all up, another shocking discovery in Saudi Arabia is the existence of 4,500-year-old roads with ancient tombs along them. Archaeologists call them funerary avenues. They are disused corridors that link oases and pastures across the desert regions of northwest and Saudi Arabia. They span large distances, some up to hundreds or thousands of kilometers, and follow the landscape's natural topography and water sources. The tombs are called pendants or ring burials, stone structures that flank the funerary avenues on both sides. Pendant burials are circular cairns with long tails extending perpendicular to the avenue, and the ring burials are circular cairns surrounded by low walls. The tombs vary in size and shape, but they are usually about 2 meters high and about 20 meters long. They contain human remains and grave goods. The funerary avenues and tombs were discovered by researchers from the University of Western Australia using aerial surveys, ground surveys, excavations, and satellite imagery. Since their discovery, about 80 tombs have been sampled using radiocarbon dating and other methods. The datings put the tombs to about 4,500 years ago, between 2600 and 2000 BC. They may have been built by nomadic tribes who moved across the landscape following rainfall patterns and vegetation. All these discoveries have opened our eyes to a different part of Saudi Arabia, with a more prosperous past than the story of the desert lands we're used to. Which part of these discoveries shocked you the most? Let us know in the comment section. Like the video and subscribe to the channel for more.